Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about Lucifer Season 5 Part 1. So, first off, I just wanted to say I definitely enjoyed this season. I think that since the show moved over to Netflix, it's been like just a different level of quality. It's been a lot better, and I definitely will say that in terms of the quality of the two seasons, 4 and 5, there really hasn't been any change in terms of how good the show is, which is awesome, because definitely after seeing the trailer for the season, I was a little bit worried, specifically with the whole twin situation type of deal. I wasn't really sure if I would like it. Now, I will say that I don't really like it, but there's a lot of other stuff going on in the show that makes it kind of okay, you know? That being said, if you haven't watched this show, you should really click off, because what I just mentioned, that is part of the trailer, so I don't really consider that a spoiler, but from this point onwards, we're going to be discussing pretty much anything from Season 5. So, yeah, that being said, the whole Lucifer and Michael being twins thing, not a huge fan of that. I thought it was okay, but not really. You know, the way that they used the characters was totally fine, and I think everything apart from the fact that they looked the same was just... I didn't see a reason for it. I think logistically, the only thing was, oh, you want to have the actor Tom in all the episodes, right? Tom Ellis. And, I mean, that's cool, that's totally fine, but I feel like there should have been another way of going about it. I thought they would have probably done a little bit more with the whole, like, what they did in the first episode, and how Lucifer was in hell and everything else was going on in the overworld or whatever. Yeah, I just thought they could have gone about it a little bit differently, but overall, I think it's fine. I mean, I didn't love the initial concept, but the way that it was executed was done actually very, very well. Still, my preference would have been to not do the whole twin thing. I feel like the whole evil twin thing is just kind of, it's been done before, but I think the execution of it was totally fine. It was unique and it was interesting, again, but I just don't love the idea. That being said, the whole bringing Michael into the show, I was definitely a huge fan of, because in the DC Comics, which is what the show is based off of, the only two angels that exist in the comics or in the DC universe are Lucifer and Michael. So I thought that was kind of an interesting callback to it, and I guess kind of a wink to that is them being twins, being like two of a kind, whatever. I guess you could say that's a bit of a wink to them being the only two of their kind in the comic books. I think it's kind of a nod to that a little bit as well, but overall would have preferred them to not look the same, but I am happy that Michael was brought in, because I do think that it does bring a very interesting dynamic, especially because of the whole, like all of the angels are supposed to be like brothers and sisters, but these two specifically seem to have a very interesting relationship, so I thought that was a good thing to have in the show. The next thing I'm going to be discussing is the whole ring situation with Lucifer and how we got it from Lilith. I think that this entire episode was executed very, very well. I actually initially thought that we were going to jump to Maze hearing the story somewhere else as well, but I had actually forgotten that Michael had said that he would not be the one to tell the story to her. So I loved the reveal at the very end as to how Trixie is the one that tells Maze what really went down back, like, I believe it's close to 100 years in the past, right? I loved the entire execution of that episode overall, with the black and white being back in time, and how they kind of integrated characters that obviously shouldn't be there, and then how interesting that they made it in terms of making, like, the detective his partner, even though it was like a completely different person. It was like this dude that he had known who was like a war veteran. I thought that was very interesting, and it was basically just like, okay, we're gonna make her the character because her mom wants, or her child wants, like, inclusivity in the story. So it's pretty much like, oh, okay, this child who I'm telling the story to pretty much wants a diverse cast, so to speak, I guess, in the story, and that's kind of how it was integrated into the whole thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Good way to pretty much work around having all of the actors in the actual episode and not really being in a situation where you have to bring in completely new faces for one particular episode. I thought that was very creative. The whole ring situation does bring the question of how does that stuff actually work. What I mean by that is if someone was to, break that ring, does Lilith get her immortality back even though she is now gone by the end of the season, right? Or can it be absorbed by someone else? Who knows, right? I'm very curious about that because it's also interesting because the whole story is that in I guess legends or whatever, the idea is that Lilith's ring is what holds her immortality, and by the end of it, even though it wasn't actually true, it becomes true. And I thought that was kind of interesting as well, because it's kind of oh, this story is just a story, but you know what? We're going to take a page out of that book, put my immortality in this ring, and hand it over to someone else. And I do wonder if someone else will be able to use that. I think that it would be interesting to bring that ring back as an actual plot point, as to something that could actually be used in the future, at least for part 2 of this season 5. The next thing was the handling of Maze this entire season. I honestly didn't love it because every single time she goes down the same path of betraying everyone, it's kind of come on, do something different, please. Because this has kind of been the same fiddle that's been played, or the same tune that's been played every single season for a couple seasons now. I mean, first there was Cain, then there was Eve. Eve wasn't really a villain, but she was going against what the protagonists were doing, and Nazakine just kind of followed her into that. And then now it's Michael, and it's kind of you need to realize that you should make decisions for yourself, and they should be a little bit more thought out, please. So I really was kind of disappointed with that, especially because I do think that she's probably one of the most interesting characters in the show to me. Yeah, so I do hope that she kind of grows a little bit more in the second half of the season, because even at the end, in the last episode, it's kind of I just kind of sighed, and I was really? This is what's happening? Please stop. Yeah, and it's not that I don't understand her perspective on why she's angry with Lucifer. It's just kind of you've played this tune so many times, you've done this dance, whatever you want to say as the saying. It's been done so many times, and I want her to move forward, because I think it'll be very interesting to see where she can end up by the end of the series. So I'm definitely hopeful to see where she goes moving forward, but I really do hope that they don't just continue to repeat the same cycle, especially now that we're about to end this series with another couple of episodes that are going to be released at some point down the line. So from here, I want to discuss Dan and how the secret was revealed to him finally. And obviously, Dan, up until this point, did not realize that the whole situation with Lucifer being actually the devil was a real thing, that Menedel really was an angel, that I guess Charlotte at one point was the goddess of everything, when Charlotte wasn't really awake in her body, whatever. It's very interesting. So I really do want to see a little bit more of him developing those ideas and understanding the situation a little bit more, because I think that the way that he reacted made absolutely perfect sense with his character, because especially the last few seasons, he's just been in downward spiral after downward spiral, right? And finally at the start of this season, he's trying to take care of himself, become, I guess, a little bit better, and a little bit more optimistic, things like that, and just trying to be a better person. But he doesn't really believe, he doesn't have a belief system, right? He doesn't believe in any type of faith, and that's kind of the path that he's taken. And then partway through the season, he realizes that it's all real, and that following episode, he's at Charlotte's grave, right? We haven't really talked about all that much this season because she's been dead, but you kind of saw the portrait of, or the image of her on Dan's desk, things like that. But he's basically having a conversation with her about how, I mean, she kind of realizes, well, Amenadiel must have been right, because Amenadiel did take her up to heaven when his wings returned after she died. And then he realizes that, like, he doesn't really know where to go from there. Then obviously Michael, who actually manipulated the situation for Dan to see Lucifer's devil face, basically tries to take advantage of the situation and pretty much sends Dan into a spiral to try and kill Lucifer, which doesn't work, surprisingly enough. And I was actually very surprised about that. I thought he was going to die, and then there was going to have to be a method for him coming back, potentially talking to his father again. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting the way that they went about that. I also don't really understand what happens when an angel dies, because from season 1 we do know that Lucifer went back to hell when he died, but what we don't know is he still considered an angel? Is he just a soul at that point? Because if he's still an angel at that point, he could still rule hell, things like that. That was just a question that popped up, and I kind of thought of when this whole situation came about once again. But yeah, just something that I've been pondering. But yeah, for the second half of this final season, definitely want Dan to become more involved with the day-to-day craziness of Celestials and everything that's going on in this whole side of the story that Dan hasn't really been a part of. So I think that's going to be super interesting to see. From here, we're going to be discussing Chloe finding out that she is actually a, I guess, gift from God or a miracle, whatever you want to say. Basically, like how Amenadiel had blessed. I don't really know what the word was, but kind of he said given a gift, so to speak, to her parents, which was her, right? And I loved the reaction of her asking if Amenadiel was her father. I just thought that was hilarious because that hadn't even crossed my mind, and I was like, oh, that's a very interesting way to think about it, because she thought that the word like blessing was kind of a euphemism or whatever, but it wasn't. I thought that was very, very hilarious in that moment. It's making me chuckle just thinking about it. But yeah, I thought that was a very interesting moment, and definitely totally happy with the way that she reacted to it, because she basically said she needed her space and just needed to figure things out on her own, and that made so much sense to me, because I didn't at all want this to be something that just kind of got pushed away after one episode, right? Some of the things with this show, especially in earlier seasons, felt like it was super episodic, so I didn't want this to be one of those things that just got resolved at the end of the episode. And I loved that at the end of the case, or I think very close to the end of that episode, or one of those episodes, she was still dealing with it, and Lucifer was originally thinking that, you know, this is going to be something that's going to blow over at the end of the case, because that always really happens a lot for this show. And she literally tells them that, look, this is not going to be something that just goes away at the end of this case. And I almost like applauded. Like, I was kind of like, yes, finally, good. There are consequences to the things that are happening in this show, and I loved it. And again, I do think that it was a very good progression for her character. I think that finally, at the very least, all the cards are on the table officially, right? And so I thought that was a very interesting thing to do as well. With their relationship as well, it's also important to note that Lucifer's powers are kind of changing a little bit once more. So he's once again invulnerable in front of Chloe. And not only that, he gets his powers back as well, right? So he loses his powers after him and Chloe he get intimate, yeah. And it was kind of like this whole thing where he was finally vulnerable with someone else completely, and then it just kind of completely reverses, right? He gets his powers back, he is now invulnerable around her, and it kind of feels like he has put up his walls again. So it's going to be interesting to see if that's actually the case, because we didn't get to see him actually say that he loves her. So I actually thought that in that moment he was actually not able to say it, because he couldn't lie. That's what I thought was happening, but seems like it was obviously like time froze. So that was kind of interesting. I want to know if that was actually the case, or it was just kind of timing that he couldn't say it, or things like that. I think it's going to be interesting to explore for the next season. I actually do think that he does love her, so I don't really think that's actually true. But for a second there, I thought that that's what was happening. Next, I want to talk about Linda's story for this season. I thought it was okay. I didn't love it all that much. It just kind of happened to me. It wasn't something that I was super interested in, but I did understand what it was there for. It felt more like it was there to bolster Maze's storyline for the season with her relationship with her mother, Lilith. But overall, I mean, it existed. It just wasn't my favorite part of the show, but definitely wasn't anything in terms of like, it wasn't a lesser quality aspect of the show. It just wasn't something that I was most interested in for whatever reason for me. So that's really all I have to say about that. Next, I want to talk about, I guess, Ella's journey as well. So for Ella, I thought that it was very interesting to see her perspective kind of on herself and how that kind of changed as the episodes progressed. So at first, it's very clear that she doesn't really have much, I don't know if self-respect's the right word, or maybe self-worth. Self-worth is probably the better word, right? In the sense that she doesn't really see that she deserves someone who's a really good person and will treat her well, things like that. And she's going after quote-unquote like bad boys, whatever. Pretty much people who are just not decent humans. I thought that was very interesting, especially because of the whole arc that she had last year as well, with her, like, I guess, loss of faith and things like that. So for this year, it was kind of like, oh, she's still trying to rebuild herself and figure out exactly where she stands, but at the same time, she is the kindest person on the show. She's the most, I guess she's like the best human on the show, like human being on the show. She's just so kind, things like that. But at the same time, she's struggling with this whole sense of self-worth type of deal. Thought that was a very interesting struggle for her to have, and I do hope that that once again gets resolved in the second half of the season, especially after what happened in these last few episodes, right? As we saw, she kind of gave herself permission to meet and date a quote-unquote nice person, and it goes horribly, horribly wrong, right? So I'm curious to know exactly how this is going to impact her, whether or not she thinks that like she's going to go back and revert to where she was at the start of the season, where she, like in terms of where she is mentally, things like that, and potentially not thinking that she deserves to find someone who's right for her, things like that. I think that'd be very interesting to see where that goes, but I do hope that she ends up having a happy ending. I also thought it was very interesting that of all the people to be in that situation, it is the person who was also on Dexter, right? So, I mean, for those of you who don't know, Dexter's a show about a serial killer, so I thought that, considering she's the only person who's on that show, to be the one kind of in that relationship with a serial killer was kind of interesting to me as well. I thought it was kind of, I don't know if irony is the right word for that, but I just thought it was a very interesting choice on the writer's part, and maybe even a fun nod to fans of her from that series as well. Okay, to end off this episode, we're going to be discussing the final battle, and obviously that ending for this part of Season 5. So to start, we have the battle between the four, I guess, non-human characters in the show. We got Maze and Michael versus Amenadiel and Lucifer. Thought this battle was very, very well executed, and I think the outcome also made a ton of sense, right? Having Mazikeen fall first, because she is obviously the weakest person in this lineup, being a demon versus the angels that are also in this fight. I thought that was kind of obvious, especially now that Lucifer is also at full power with his wings. Now, from there, it becomes pretty evident that it's a 2-on-1 battle amongst the angels. Thought that made a ton of sense once more, and just when we thought things were going to be wrapping up, we get the fight broken up by none other than God. So I've actually been waiting for this moment, and I actually expected it. I just thought it was going to be at the very end of the show, not during the last season. And so I thought it would just be like a fun little thing at the very end. But no, we got to actually see God at the end of this part of this season. So very, very interested to see what's going to happen next. He did stop the fight, so I'm assuming that Michael didn't actually trick him as much as he thought. So it's going to be interesting to see where things go from here. Are we going to be seeing some end of days type of things? Are we going to see some aspects of the comics potentially as well playing into it? I'm not going to spoil anything from those comics because also I don't know too much about them, but I do know the general gist of the story of Michael and Lucifer from the comic books. But I'm very curious to see if they go down a similar route with that or if it's completely different. But especially with the reveal at the very end, I'm very excited to see what comes about. So yeah, that is all I had to say for Season 5, Part 1 of Lucifer. So I'm very excited for the next season. I definitely want to see what comes about, especially at the start, and how things progress over the next couple of episodes when they release. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know your thoughts, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye.